I watched my husband hug his twin brother at the airport, and something felt wrong. When I secretly took photos and compared them later, I realized they had identical scars, identical birthmarks, and identical everything. That's when the horrifying truth hit me. There was no twin brother. My name is Janet Page, and I need to tell you about the 15-year lie that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. It started 3 months ago, when my husband Marcus announced his twin brother would be visiting from Germany. "You never mentioned having a twin," I said, looking up from my morning coffee. Marcus barely glanced at me. "We haven't spoken in years. Family drama, you know how it is?" Something in his voice made me pause, but I let it go. Marcus had always been private about his past, claiming his family died in an accident before we met. Now suddenly, he had a living twin brother? It didn't add up, but I wanted to be supportive. The day of the airport pickup, I offered to come along. Marcus shut that down fast. "He's been through a lot. Needs time to adjust. Just us guys for now." I watched from our bedroom window as they pulled into the driveway. The man getting out of the car looked exactly like my husband. Same height, same build, same walk. But something felt off. The way they hugged seemed forced, awkward, like strangers putting on a show. Over the next few days, I noticed more strange things. This brother, who Marcus called Klaus, never left the house. He stayed in our guest room, door always locked. When I tried to make conversation, he'd mumble responses and disappear. His accent kept slipping too, sometimes sounding German, sometimes sounding exactly like Marcus. But the weirdest part? I never saw them together anymore. One would be in the kitchen, then leave just as the other appeared. It was like they were taking turns being visible. I started paying closer attention. That's when I noticed Marcus had been acting different for weeks before Klaus arrived. More secretive, taking strange phone calls, disappearing for hours with no explanation. And now, with his brother here, he was barely home at all. My friend Giselle Irwin came over for coffee one morning while Marcus was at work, and Klaus was locked in the guest room. "This whole twin thing is weird, Janet," she said, stirring her cup thoughtfully. "I've known Marcus for 10 years through you. He's never once mentioned having a brother, let alone a twin." "I know," I whispered, glancing toward the stairs. "And have you noticed how they're never in the same room together when I'm around?" Giselle raised an eyebrow. "Now that you mention it, yeah, that's really strange." That afternoon, I decided to test my suspicions. I knocked on the guest room door. "Klaus, I made some sandwiches if you're hungry." No answer. I tried the handle, locked as always. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Marcus's voice, talking on the phone inside that room. The same voice, the same laugh, the same everything. I pressed my ear to the door and heard him say, "The transition is going better than expected. Janet suspects nothing." Transition? What transition? That evening when Marcus came home, I watched him carefully. Same clothes Klaus had been wearing earlier. Same cologne. Same everything. When I asked about Klaus, Marcus said he was feeling sick and staying in his room. "Maybe I should take him some soup," I suggested. "No," Marcus snapped, then caught himself. "I mean, he's sleeping. Don't want to disturb him." I knew then, somehow, impossibly, Marcus and Klaus were the same person. But how? And why would my husband create such an elaborate lie? I waited until Marcus left for work the next morning, then used the spare key to unlock the guest room. What I found inside changed everything. The room was set up like a dressing room. Wigs, makeup, different clothes laid out carefully. And on the dresser, a collection of medical documents that made my hands shake as I read them. gender reassignment surgery, hormone therapy, and a name I'd never heard before. The name Marcus used to have, 15 years ago, before we met, before he became the man I married. The documents told a story I could barely comprehend. Marcus had transitioned years ago, but apparently he'd been reversing that transition in secret. Klaus wasn't a twin brother from Germany. Klaus was who Marcus used to be, and somehow he was becoming that person again. I heard the front door slam and quickly shoved the papers back. Marcus called up the stairs. "Janet, you home?" But his voice sounded different, higher, more like Klaus. I came downstairs and froze. Standing in my living room was Klaus, but wearing Marcus's wedding ring, the same ring I'd put on his finger 7 years ago. That's when I realized the truth. But I was already too late. My heart hammered against my chest as I stared at Klaus wearing Marcus's wedding ring. The room felt like it was spinning around me. "Marcus?" I whispered. Klaus, or whoever this person was, froze. For a moment, the mask slipped completely. I saw panic flash across his face, the same expression Marcus made when he was caught in a lie about forgetting to pick up groceries or missing a dinner reservation. But this was so much bigger than forgotten groceries. "I don't know what you mean," he said, but his voice cracked. The German accent was completely gone now. This was Marcus's voice, just pitched higher, more feminine. I took a step closer. "Where did you get that ring?" His hand instinctively moved to cover the wedding band, but it was too late. I'd seen it, the same ring with the tiny scratch on the side from when he'd caught it on a fence post 3 years ago. "Klaus gave it to me," he stammered, "for safekeeping while he showered." The lie hung in the air between us like smoke. We both knew I didn't believe it. We both knew he knew I didn't believe it. I walked to the kitchen, my legs shaking. I needed space to think, to process what I was seeing. But he followed me, and I could hear the desperation in his footsteps. "Janet, you're imagining things. The stress of having a houseguest, it's making you... Stop." I turned around and looked him directly in the eyes. "Just stop lying to me." For a moment, we stood there in silence. I watched as his whole body seemed to deflate. The performance was exhausting him. I could see it now. The makeup carefully applied to change his features slightly, the way he held his shoulders different, the practiced gestures that weren't quite natural. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked quietly. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. "Doing what?" "Being two people. Being Klaus and Marcus." "How long?" His eyes filled with tears, but he still wouldn't admit it. "You're confused, Janet. Maybe you should sit down." That's when I remembered something that made my stomach drop. Last month, Marcus had gone on a business trip to Chicago. He'd been gone for 5 days. But now I was thinking about that time differently. The phone calls that went straight to voicemail. The way he seemed different when he came back. Quieter, more distant. The excuse about being exhausted from meetings. "The Chicago trip?" I said slowly. "You weren't in Chicago, were you?" I saw the answer in his face before he could speak. "You were here, in this house, being Klaus, getting ready for this whole charade." His hands were shaking now. "Janet, please. You don't understand how complicated this is." "Then explain it to me." The words came out louder than I intended. "Explain why my husband of 7 years has been lying to me about having a twin brother. Explain why you're wearing his wedding ring. Explain why I found medical documents in that guest room." The moment I mentioned the documents, his face went white. He knew I'd been in the room. He knew I'd seen everything. "You went through my things," he whispered. "Your things? I thought they were Klaus's things." He realized his mistake immediately. The pretense was crumbling, and we both knew it. I walked to the kitchen counter and gripped the edge, trying to steady myself. The documents I saw, they weren't just about transitioning, were they? They were about transitioning back. He didn't answer, but his silence told me everything. You've been taking hormones again, changing your appearance, becoming someone else? But why? Why create this elaborate lie about a twin brother? Why not just tell me the truth about who you used to be? When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet I almost couldn't hear him. Because Klaus isn't who I used to be, Janet. Klaus is who I'm becoming again. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the counter harder. What does that mean? It means the transition isn't permanent. It means I made a mistake 15 years ago, and I've been trying to figure out how to undo it without losing you. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. So, you created a fake person? You've been living a double life for months, pretending to be your own twin brother, all so you could… What? Test out being someone else? It's not that simple. Then make it simple. I was crying now, angry tears that I couldn't control. Make it simple, because nothing about this makes sense to me. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, he looked like the Marcus I married. Vulnerable, scared, human. I never told you about my past because I was ashamed. He began. The transition, the surgery, all of it happened because I thought it was what I wanted. But over the years, especially after we got married, I started having doubts, regrets. I sat down across from him, my heart breaking and racing at the same time. So, instead of talking to me about it, you decided to create an imaginary person? I didn't know how to talk to you about it. How do you tell the person you love that you might not be who they think you are? That you might need to become someone completely different? By being honest. The words came out as a shout. By trusting me enough to tell me the truth. And risk losing you? You've lost me anyway. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. Do you understand that? This lie, this deception, it's worse than any truth could have been. He was crying now too, and seeing him cry made everything more confusing. This was still Marcus, the man I'd shared a bed with for 7 years, the man who brought me coffee every morning and remembered how I liked my eggs. But it was also a stranger who'd been lying to me for months, maybe years. I was trying to protect you, he whispered. From what? From knowing who I married? From having a say in my own life? I walked to the window and looked out at our backyard. The same backyard where we'd talked about planting a garden someday. Where we'd discussed maybe getting a dog. Where we'd made plans for a future that now felt like it was built on lies. How long? I asked, without turning around. How long have you been planning this? The Klaus thing? About 6 months? 6 months, half a year of elaborate planning and deception. But the doubts, the regrets about transitioning, that's been going on for years. I turned around to face him. Years? How many years? Since before we got married. The words hit me like a slap. You mean you married me while questioning your entire identity? You made vows to me while planning to become someone else. I thought the feelings would go away. I thought loving you would be enough to make me happy with who I am. So, I was supposed to fix you? Our marriage was supposed to cure your identity crisis? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. I was pacing now, unable to stand still. You thought marrying me would solve all your problems, and when it didn't, you decided to secretly explore becoming someone else. I was confused, Janet. I still am. Then get unconfused. figure out who you are and what you want, but stop dragging me through this nightmare with you." We stood there looking at each other across the kitchen that had once felt like home and now felt like a crime scene. Everything was evidence of a life that might have been a lie from the beginning. That's when I heard something that made my blood freeze. A car door slamming in the driveway. We both looked toward the front of the house. Marcus, or Klaus, or whoever he was, looked terrified. "Who is that?" I whispered. "I don't know." But I could tell from his face that he was lying again. He knew exactly who was at our door. The doorbell rang once, then twice. Then someone started knocking urgently. "Janet! Janet, are you home? It's Giselle." My friend Giselle's voice, but she sounded panicked, desperate. I looked at Marcus, who had gone completely white. "What does Giselle want?" I asked him. "I don't know. Stop lying to me." The knocking got louder. "Janet, I found something." "Hey, something about Marcus you need to see." My heart stopped. Giselle had found something. Something about my husband that was so important she'd driven over here in a panic. I started walking toward the front door, but Marcus grabbed my arm. "Don't answer it." "Why?" "Please, Janet, just give me 5 minutes to explain." "Explain what? What did she find?" The knocking stopped. Then I heard Giselle's voice again, but closer now, like she was walking around the house. "Janet, I can see your car in the driveway. I know you're home." I pulled away from Marcus and headed for the door. Whatever Giselle had found, I needed to know. I was done with lies and secrets and half-truths. But as I reached for the doorknob, Marcus said something that stopped me cold. "She knows about the insurance money." I turned around slowly. "What insurance money?" His face crumpled. "The life insurance policy, the one I took out on Klaus." The room started spinning again. "Life insurance? On your fake twin brother?" "Janet, I can explain." But before he could say another word, I heard Giselle's voice right outside our front window. "Janet, the man you think is your husband's twin brother? He doesn't exist, and there's a life insurance policy worth $500,000 in your name." I looked at Marcus, and in that moment, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than all the lies combined. I saw panic. Desperate, cornered animal panic. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about identity confusion or transition regrets. This was about money. A lot of money. And I was about to find out exactly how far my husband was willing to go to get it. I stood frozen at the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. $500,000. The words echoed in my mind like a death sentence. Behind me, Marcus was breathing so hard I could hear it across the room. "Janet!" Giselle's voice was right outside now. "I have the documents! You need to see what I found!" I turned back to Marcus, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't confusion about his identity anymore. This wasn't about transition regrets or finding himself. This was calculated. This was planned. "You took out life insurance on a person who doesn't exist," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain, and you put it in my name." The pieces were falling into place now, each one making me sicker than the last. Which means if something happened to Klaus, nothing was going to happen to Klaus. Because Klaus is you. I was shouting now, past caring if Giselle could hear. "You can't kill someone who doesn't exist. But you can disappear them, can't you? You can make Klaus vanish and collect the money." Marcus took a step toward me, his hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. "Janet, please, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is. Tell me the truth for once in your lying life." Outside, Giselle had stopped knocking, but I could hear her moving around. She was probably looking through windows, trying to see inside. My best friend, trying to save me from a man I'd shared a bed with for 7 years. "The money," Marcus started, then stopped. His whole body was shaking now. "We needed the money." "For what?" "For the surgeries. For everything. Do you know how much it costs to transition back? Do you know what insurance doesn't cover?" I stared at him. Even now, even caught red-handed in an insurance fraud scheme, he was trying to make this about his identity crisis. "So you decided to commit fraud instead of getting a job? Instead of being honest with me about what you needed? I tried to get loans. I tried everything. But with my credit, with our debt." Our debt. I'd known we had some credit card bills, but I'd never seen the full picture. Marcus handled all our finances, had been handling them for years while I trusted him completely. "How much debt?" I asked. He looked away. "Enough that $500,000 would solve everything." The casual way he said it made my stomach drop. Not just thousands. Not just a few maxed out credit cards. Enough that $500,000 would only solve everything, not set us up for life. "Janet," Giselle's voice again, but from the backyard now. "I'm calling the police if you don't answer me in the next 5 minutes. This is serious." Marcus's face went white. "Don't let her call the police." "Why? Because you'll go to jail for fraud?" "Because I'll go to jail for more than fraud." The words hung in the air between us. I felt like I was falling down a deep, dark hole with no bottom. "What do you mean, more than fraud?" "Janet." He was crying again, but these weren't the tears from before. These were desperate, terrified tears. "The debts aren't just credit cards." "What are they?" "Some people, dangerous people. They lent me money when the banks wouldn't." My legs gave out. I sank into the kitchen chair, staring at this stranger who used to be my husband. "You borrowed money from criminals?" I was desperate. The transition surgeries, they were so expensive, and I thought I could pay it back before you ever found out. "How much?" "Does it matter?" "It matters to me?" He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. 200,000 with interest. $200,000 to dangerous people. People who would hurt us if they didn't get paid. "So, the Klaus plan," I could barely get the words out. "You were going to fake his death and collect the insurance to pay back criminals? It was supposed to be simple. Klaus comes to visit, Klaus has an accident, Klaus dies, we collect the money and pay everyone back. No one gets hurt." "Except me." I stood up so fast the chair fell over. "Except your wife, who would have to live with thinking your brother died in our house. Who would have to grieve for someone who never existed. I would have told you eventually." "When? After I spent years mourning your fake dead brother? After I went to therapy for the trauma? After I blamed myself for not being able to save him?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, we both heard something that made our blood freeze. The back door opening. "Janet?" Giselle's voice, but from inside the house now. "I used the spare key. Where are you?" I looked at Marcus in panic. Giselle was inside. She had documents about the insurance policy. She knew Klaus didn't exist, and Marcus owed dangerous people hundreds of thousands of dollars. "In here," I called out, my voice shaking. Giselle appeared in the kitchen doorway, and the look on her face told me she knew everything. She was holding a manila envelope in one hand and her phone in the other. "Thank God you're okay," she said, looking from me to Marcus. "When I found out about the insurance policy and realized Klaus wasn't real, I was terrified something had happened to you." Marcus stood up slowly, Giselle, you don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. She held up the envelope. Fake identity documents for Klaus Brennan. Life insurance policy for $500,000 with Janet as the beneficiary. And records showing you've been living as Klaus for months, building a paper trail. My heart was pounding so hard, I could barely think. How did you find all this? I work for an insurance company, remember? When you mentioned your husband's twin brother visiting from Germany, something felt off. Germans don't usually have such perfect American accents, so I ran some checks. She pulled papers from the envelope. Klaus Brennan doesn't exist in any German records, but these documents show someone's been very busy creating him. Bank accounts, rental history, even medical records. I looked at Marcus, who was backing toward the kitchen counter. Medical records? Giselle nodded grimly. That's the worst part. The medical records show Klaus has a terminal illness, something that would make his death seem natural and expected. The room started spinning again. Terminal illness, natural death, insurance payout. You were going to fake cancer? I whispered. Marcus's back hit the counter. He had nowhere left to go. It was just on paper, just to make the insurance policy make sense. No one was actually going to get sick. Because Klaus was going to die anyway, I finished. In some tragic accident that would look natural because he was already supposedly dying. Giselle was watching Marcus like a hawk. The question is, what was the plan after that? Take the money and run? Start a new life somewhere else? We were going to pay our debts and move on with our lives, Marcus said, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. What debts? Giselle asked. I looked at her, then at Marcus, then back at her. My best friend, who'd risked everything to save me, who'd uncovered a fraud scheme that could have destroyed my life. He owes money to dangerous people, I said quietly. A lot of money. Giselle's face went pale. How dangerous? Before Marcus could answer, we all heard something that made our hearts stop. A car pulling into the driveway, door slamming, multiple footsteps on the front porch. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. Marcus looked at me with pure terror in his eyes. They found me. The doorbell rang once. Then someone started pounding on the door with enough force to shake the windows. Marcus Brennan! A man's voice, deep and threatening. We know you're in there. Time's up. Giselle grabbed my arm. We need to call the police. No! Marcus whispered desperately. If the police come, they'll kill all of us. The pounding got louder. We want our money, Marcus. All of it. Today. I looked at my husband, this stranger who'd dragged me into a nightmare of lies and debt and danger. Then I looked at Giselle, who was already dialing on her phone. Wait, I whispered to her. Don't call yet. The pounding stopped. Everything went quiet for a moment. Then we heard something that made my blood turn to ice. The sound of the front door being kicked in. Heavy footsteps in my hallway. Multiple voices, all of them angry. Find him, someone said. Check every room. I grabbed Giselle's hand and looked at Marcus, who was shaking so hard he could barely stand. We were trapped in our own kitchen with nowhere to run, and the dangerous people my husband owed money to were inside our house. That's when I heard the footsteps stop right outside the kitchen door, and a voice that made my heart stop completely. Well, well. Looks like we found ourselves a little family reunion. The man who stepped through the kitchen doorway wasn't what I expected. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a business suit that had seen better days. Behind him stood two younger men, but they didn't look like the violent criminals I'd imagined. Mr. Brennan, the older man said. his voice tired rather than threatening. "We need to talk." Marcus pressed himself against the counter, his face white as paper. "Look, I can explain." "No more explanations." The man held up his hand. 15 years of explanations. 15 years of promises. We're done with words. 15 years? I looked between them, confused. Marcus had only been Klaus for a few months, according to what I'd discovered. Giselle squeezed my hand tighter. "Who are you people?" The older man glanced at her, then at me. "Ma'am, I'm Dr. Richard Steinberg. I run a private medical practice in Chicago." He gestured to the men behind him. "These are my colleagues, Dr. Martinez and Dr. Chen." Doctors? My mind reeled. You're not criminals?" "No, ma'am. We're physicians, and your husband owes us a considerable amount of money for medical services rendered over the past 15 years. Medical services? 15 years? The pieces weren't fitting together. "What kind of medical services?" I asked, though part of me was terrified to know. Dr. Steinberg looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity. "Mrs. Brennan, your husband has been our patient for a very long time. The procedures we performed, they were extensive, expensive, and he's never paid a single bill." I felt the kitchen floor shifting under my feet. "Procedures?" Marcus closed his eyes. "Janet, please." "What procedures?" I demanded, my voice getting stronger. Dr. Steinberg reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder. "Gender reassignment surgery, multiple procedures over several years, hormone therapy, reconstructive surgery, and then..." He paused, looking directly at Marcus. "The reversal procedures." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gender reassignment. Reversal. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Your husband," Dr. Steinberg said gently, "was born female. He transitioned to male in his early 20s, which is when he first came to our clinic. We helped him become the man he wanted to be." The room spun around me. Marcus, my husband, born female. But then, about 5 years ago, he came back to us. He wanted to reverse some of the procedures. He wanted to be able to live as both identities when needed. Both identities. Klaus wasn't just a disguise. Klaus was who Marcus used to be before transitioning. He wanted to be able to present as female again? Giselle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Steinberg nodded. "Partially, yes. It's not uncommon for people to want flexibility in their gender presentation. But the procedures were complex and expensive. Very expensive." I looked at Marcus, who was staring at the floor. "How expensive?" "Including the original transition and the recent modifications, nearly $300,000. A fortune. More money than we'd ever had. More money than Marcus could ever hope to earn." "And he never paid," I said, the reality sinking in. "We worked with him for years. Payment plans, reduced rates, but he kept making excuses. Then he stopped coming to appointments altogether. Stopped returning our calls." I thought about our marriage. 15 years. Marcus had been transitioning when we met. He'd been living as a man, but he'd originally been born female. And I'd never known. "The insurance fraud," Giselle said suddenly. "You weren't just trying to pay back dangerous criminals. You were trying to pay back doctors." Marcus finally looked up. "I thought if I could get the insurance money as Klaus, I could pay them back, and we could move forward with our lives. No one would get hurt." "Except me," I said, my voice hollow. "Except your wife, who's been living a lie for 15 years. "It wasn't a lie." Marcus stepped toward me. "I am the man you married. The transition was real. My love for you is real. Everything we built together is real." "But Klaus is real too," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Klaus isn't just a disguise. Klaus is who you were before you transitioned. Dr. Steinberg nodded. The recent procedures allowed him to present convincingly as either gender when needed. It's sophisticated medical work. I felt like I was drowning. My husband had been born female. He'd transitioned to male. We'd fallen in love and gotten married. And then, without telling me, he'd had procedures to allow him to live as both genders. Why? I whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Because I was terrified you'd leave me. When we met, I was finally living as my true self. I was Marcus. But the debt kept growing, and I thought if I could just handle it quietly, by becoming Klaus again. Klaus was never gone, he said softly. Klaus was always part of me. The doctors just made it possible for both parts to exist. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. The wedding ring, that's why Klaus was wearing your ring? Because Klaus is me too, just a different version of me. Giselle was staring at the doctors. So you came here to collect payment? Dr. Steinberg nodded. We've been more than patient, but we can't continue to operate a medical practice when patients don't pay for services. We need to resolve this. What happens if he can't pay? I asked. We'll have to pursue legal action, medical debt collection. It could result in wage garnishment, asset seizure. Our house, our life, everything we'd built could be taken away because of medical bills I'd never known existed. I looked at my husband, this person I thought I knew completely. Born female, transitioned to male, married me, then secretly had procedures to live as both genders, all while hiding hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt. Is there anything else? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Any other secrets I should know about? Marcus met my eyes. For a moment, I thought he might tell me everything was out in the open now. Then I saw something flicker across his face. A hesitation. A look that told me there was more. Marcus, I said slowly. What else? Dr. Steinberg cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss payment arrangements. No. I stood up, never taking my eyes off my husband. What else, Marcus? The silence stretched between us. Giselle was watching. The doctors were waiting. And Marcus was looking at me like a man with one more secret too terrible to tell. The debt? He said finally. It's not just to them. My heart sank. Who else? The procedures they did, they weren't covered by insurance. I had to find other ways to pay for them over the years. What other ways? Marcus looked down at his hands. I took out loans from different people, used different names, different identities. Different identities, not just Marcus and Klaus, more than that. How many identities? Giselle asked. How much do you owe in total? I whispered. Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked up at me, and I saw the full weight of what he'd been carrying. Including the medical bills, close to $500,000, to a lot of different people. Some of them, he swallowed hard. Some of them aren't as understanding as the doctors. $500,000, a fortune we could never repay. Borrowed from people who might not be content with just taking our house. I thought I'd uncovered the whole truth. My husband's secret identity, the insurance fraud, the medical debt. But as I looked at Marcus standing in our kitchen, surrounded by doctors demanding payment he didn't have, I realized I was only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Who else, Marcus? I asked quietly. Who else do you owe money to? The look in his eyes told me I really didn't want to know the answer. And that's when we all heard it again. Another car in the driveway. More footsteps on the porch. But this time, the knock on the door was different. Official, authoritative. Police! Open up! Dr. Steinberg looked confused. We didn't call the police. Giselle shook her head. Neither did I. I looked at Marcus, whose face had gone from white to green. Marcus, I said slowly, why are the police here? Before he could answer, we heard the front door open and heavy footsteps in the hallway. This is Detective Morrison, Chicago PD. We have a warrant. A warrant? For what? I stared at my husband, this stranger who'd been living multiple lives for 15 years, who owed $500,000 to people I'd never heard of, who'd hidden a complete gender transition from me for our entire marriage. And now the police were in my house with a warrant. I thought I'd learned the worst of it. I thought the insurance fraud and the medical debt were as bad as it could get. I was about to find out how wrong I was. The detective walked into my kitchen like he owned the place. Tall, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen everything. Behind him came 2 uniformed officers, and they weren't here for a friendly visit. Marcus Irwin? Detective Morrison's voice cut through the tension like a blade. My husband nodded, his face pale as paper. That's me. You're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. The handcuffs appeared so fast I barely saw them move. You have the right to remain silent. Identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering. The words hit me like physical blows. I grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. Wait! I shouted. There has to be some mistake! Detective Morrison looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Irwin, your husband has been running a sophisticated identity fraud operation for over a decade. We've been investigating for 2 years. 2 years. While I'd been living my normal life, making dinner, going to work, sleeping next to Marcus every night, the police had been building a case against him. The insurance policies were just the beginning, the detective continued as they cuffed Marcus. Klaus Brennan, David Chen, Maria Santos, Robert Taylor. We've identified at least 12 different identities he's been using to obtain credit, take out loans, open bank accounts. 12 identities, not just Marcus and Klaus. 12 different people my husband had been pretending to be. Dr. Steinberg stepped forward. Detective, we're here about unpaid medical bills. We had no idea about any fraud investigation. The medical procedures were how we caught him, Morrison explained. Same surgical scars, same medical history across multiple identities. Hard to fake that. I stared at Marcus as they read him his rights. My husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for 15 years. A criminal who'd been living multiple lives while I believed we had one honest life together. How much? I whispered. How much money are we talking about? Morrison consulted his notebook. Conservative estimate? Over $1 million in fraudulent loans, credit cards, and insurance claims. Possibly more. $1 million. Not hundreds of thousands. $1 million. But the medical debt alone was $500,000, I said numbly. Ma'am, the medical procedures were just one piece of this. Your husband has been systematically defrauding financial institutions using fabricated identities for years. Giselle was staring at Marcus like she'd never seen him before. You told me you were in debt. You never said you were a criminal. I never meant for it to go this far, Marcus said quietly. It started with just one loan, just to pay for the initial surgeries. But then I needed more procedures, and the interest kept growing, and it became easier to become someone else than to face what I owed. Easier to become someone else? The words echoed in my head. That's when it hit me. The real truth. The twist that made everything else make horrible sense. Klaus isn't your twin brother, I said slowly. And Klaus isn't just you living as both genders. Marcus met my eyes, and I saw the truth there before he spoke. Klaus Brennan was a real person, I continued, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Someone who existed before you took his identity. Detective Morrison nodded grimly. Klaus Brennan died in a car accident in Germany 15 years ago. No family, no close friends. Perfect target for identity theft. My legs gave out. I sank into the chair, the full weight of the betrayal crushing down on me. You didn't just transition genders? I whispered. You stole a dead man's identity to fund your medical procedures? And then you kept stealing identities to pay for more procedures to hide the evidence of the first theft. Janet, please. How many dead people are you? I asked, my voice getting louder. How many graves did you rob to pay for your surgeries? It wasn't like that. How many? Marcus looked at the floor. 7 of the identities belonged to deceased individuals. People with no family, no one to miss them. 7 dead people. My husband had stolen the identities of 7 dead people. The others were fabricated, Detective Morrison added. Completely fictional identities with manufactured credit histories. I thought about all the times Marcus had traveled for work, all the business trips, the conferences, the times he'd been gone for days at a time. You weren't traveling for work, I realized. You were traveling to be other people, to take out loans as Klaus, as David, as Maria. Some of the procedures required recovery time, Marcus said quietly. I had to be away from home so you wouldn't see the healing. Recovery time. While I'd been worried about him, missing him, he'd been recovering from surgeries paid for with stolen identities. The wedding ring? I said, understanding flooding through me. Klaus was wearing your ring because you needed to prove you were married. Married people get better loan terms, don't they? Detective Morrison nodded. Married couples are seen as more financially stable, lower risk. Even our marriage, even our love had been part of the con. Was any of it real? I asked, tears streaming down my face. Did you ever love me, or was I just part of your cover story? My love for you is the only real thing in my life, Marcus said desperately. Everything else was just survival. But you, Janet, you're real. We're real. No, I said, standing up. I'm real. I don't know what you are. The officers were leading Marcus toward the door. 15 years of marriage, walking away in handcuffs. Mrs. Irwin, Detective Morrison said gently. I need to ask, did you have any knowledge of your husband's activities? None, I said firmly. I thought Klaus was his twin brother visiting from Germany. We believe you, but I have to warn you, the financial implications for you are going to be severe. Assets purchased with fraudulent funds can be seized. Your house, your cars, your bank accounts. Everything. They were going to take everything. What about the people he owes money to? Giselle asked. The non-official lenders? Morrison's expression darkened. That's another problem entirely. When loan sharks and underground lenders discover their borrower was using a fake identity, let's just say they don't go through legal channels to collect. Loan sharks, underground lenders. People who might come looking for their money and not care that I knew nothing about my husband's crimes. Am I in danger? I asked. We're going to recommend you stay somewhere else for a while, until we can determine the extent of the illegal lending situation. Stay somewhere else. Leave my home because my husband had stolen identities and borrowed money from dangerous people. I watched through the window as they put Marcus in the back of the police car. The man I'd loved for 15 years, the man who'd held me when I cried, who'd celebrated my promotions, who'd promised to love me forever. The man who'd stolen 7 dead people's identities to pay for medical procedures I'd never known he needed. Dr. Steinberg cleared his throat. "Mrs. Irwin, about our bill." "Send it to his lawyer," I said flatly. "I don't owe you anything." "Actually," Detective Morrison said, "depending on what assets are determined to be purchased with fraudulent funds, you might not have much left to your name." The doctors left without another word. The police finished their search and departed with boxes of evidence. Giselle stayed, making tea I couldn't drink, saying comforting words I couldn't hear. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My husband wasn't just hiding a gender transition. He wasn't just committing insurance fraud. He was a career criminal who'd been stealing identities and defrauding lenders for over a decade. 7 dead people, 12 false identities, over $1 million in fraudulent debt. And me, the wife who'd never suspected a thing. "Could you have seen this coming?" I asked the empty room. Could anyone? But even as the shock began to wear off, even as I started to accept the unthinkable truth about Marcus, something still bothered me. Something Detective Morrison had said. Something about the investigation taking 2 years. If they'd been watching Marcus for 2 years, building a case against him, documenting his crimes, why arrest him now? Why today, right when the doctors showed up demanding payment? I thought about the timing. The doctors arriving this morning, the police showing up with a warrant this afternoon. Too convenient, too coincidental. Someone had tipped them off. Someone had told the police exactly when to find Marcus at home, when to catch him with evidence of his medical debt. But who? The doctors claimed they hadn't called the police. Giselle was as shocked as I was, which meant someone else knew about Marcus's crimes. Someone who'd been watching, waiting for the right moment to destroy him. Someone who might not be done destroying things yet. I finally understood part of it. My husband was a criminal who'd stolen identities to fund his medical transition and reversal procedures. But one piece still didn't fit. And something told me that piece was going to change everything all over again. I just didn't know how much worse it could get. I sat staring at the business card Detective Morrison had left behind, my mind racing through everything that had just happened. The timing bothered me. 2 years of investigation, and they chose today to arrest Marcus, right after the doctors showed up. Too convenient. I walked to Marcus's home office, the room I'd rarely entered during our marriage. He'd always said it was boring tax stuff, business paperwork. Now I wondered what else he'd been hiding in here. The police had taken boxes of evidence, but they'd left behind the furniture, the filing cabinets, the personal items that didn't seem relevant to their case. Maybe I could find something that would help me understand how deep this betrayal really went. The first drawer I opened contained normal household bills. Electric, water, mortgage payments, all in our real names, all legitimate. But underneath those familiar statements, I found something that made my blood run cold. Travel receipts, dozens of them, not just the business trips Marcus had told me about. These were tickets to cities I'd never heard him mention. Hotel bookings under names I didn't recognize. Car rentals paid for with credit cards that weren't ours. Klaus Hoffman, David Chen, Maria Santos. Names the police had mentioned as his fake identities. I pulled out more receipts, spreading them across his desk. The pattern became clear. Marcus hadn't just been traveling for work. He'd been living entire separate lives in different cities, using stolen identities to build credit histories, establish residences, create elaborate backstories. But it was the dates that shocked me most. The earliest receipt was dated 17 years ago, 2 years before we'd even met. I sank into his chair, the weight of this realization crushing down on me. Marcus had been running identity theft schemes since before I existed in his life, which meant our entire relationship might have been part of his criminal operation from the very beginning. I thought about how we'd met at a coffee shop near the financial district. He'd been so charming, so interested in my work at the bank. He'd asked detailed questions about loan applications, credit checks, financial verification processes, questions that had seemed like genuine interest in my career. Now they felt like research. My hands shook as I continued searching through his files. In the bottom drawer, I found a folder labeled JP, my initials. Inside were photocopies of my employment records, my credit report, my banking information, all dated from 18 months after we'd started dating. He'd been investigating me, learning about my access to financial systems, my knowledge of banking procedures, my clean credit history that could help legitimize his fraudulent activities. But there was more in the folder. Much more. Documents showing that Marcus had used my personal information to establish credit in some of his fake identities. My employment at the bank had been listed as a reference for Klaus Hoffman's loan applications. My salary had been used to boost David Chen's income claims. He'd been using me as collateral for his crimes without my knowledge. I felt sick. Every conversation we'd had about my work, every time he'd praised my intelligence and success at the bank, every moment I'd thought he was proud of me, he'd been calculating how to exploit my position. "Oh God," I whispered to the empty room. "How long have you been using me?" But the worst discovery was still to come. At the back of the folder, I found a handwritten list. Names and addresses of bank employees from institutions across the city. Current employees, former employees, people who'd worked in loan processing, credit verification, fraud detection. My name was on the list, but I wasn't the only one. There were 12 other names, 12 other bank employees Marcus had apparently researched or targeted. Some had dates next to them, spanning back over 15 years. Some had the word married written beside them. Marcus hadn't just targeted me. I was part of a pattern. He'd been identifying and potentially pursuing bank employees for over a decade, using romantic relationships to gain access to financial systems and legitimate his fraudulent identities. I was wife number, I couldn't even tell how many. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be Marcus calling from jail. But the number was local, unfamiliar. "This is Detective Sarah Chen with Financial Crimes. I need to speak with you urgently about your husband's case. There are things about his operation you need to know before tomorrow's arraignment. Can we meet tonight?" Detective Chen. I remembered Detective Morrison mentioning that other departments were involved in Marcus's case. Financial crimes would make sense given the scope of his identity theft operation. I texted back, "Yes. When and where?" "Your house in 1 hour. Come alone. This information is sensitive." Something about the message felt strange, but I was desperate for answers. If this detective could help me understand the full extent of Marcus's crimes, maybe I could start to figure out how to rebuild my life. I spent the next hour going through more of Marcus's files, finding evidence of even more fake identities, more fraudulent loans, more stolen lives he'd used to fund his medical procedures and maintain his elaborate deception. By the time the doorbell rang, I'd discovered that my husband's criminal operation was far more extensive than even the police had revealed. This wasn't just about gender transition expenses. This was a sophisticated, long-term fraud scheme that had destroyed multiple lives. I opened the door expecting to see a police detective. Instead, I found myself face to face with a woman I'd never seen before, but who looked strangely familiar. She was about my age, with short brown hair and tired eyes that held the same pain I'd been feeling all day. She was holding a police badge, but something about her seemed off. "Mrs. Irwin?" she said quietly. "I'm Detective Chen, but before we talk about your husband's crimes, I need to tell you something else." "What?" I asked, stepping back to let her in. She closed the door behind her and turned to face me. "Marcus didn't just steal identities to fund his medical transition. He stole identities to create entire fake lives. Lives where he could have relationships with other women while maintaining his marriage to you." My heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not really Detective Chen," she said, her voice breaking. "My name is Giselle Irwin, and I've been married to your husband for 8 years. The room spun around me. Giselle, the woman who'd been comforting me all day. The woman who'd held my hand while I discovered my husband's betrayal. She was Marcus's other wife. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Giselle is my friend. You've been here with me. You were as shocked as I was." "I was shocked," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But not because I didn't know about Marcus's crimes. I was shocked because I didn't know about you." I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. "You knew he was stealing identities?" "I knew he was Klaus Hoffman," she said. "That's who I married. Klaus Hoffman, the successful businessman who traveled frequently for work. I never knew Marcus Irwin existed until today." The pieces began falling into place. Klaus wasn't just one of Marcus's fake identities. Klaus was a complete alternate life. A life where he was married to Giselle, where he lived in a different house, where he was a different person entirely. "The doctors this morning," I said slowly. "They weren't just looking for Marcus. They were looking for Klaus, too." "The medical bills were sent to both addresses," Giselle confirmed. "When I got them, I was confused. Klaus had never mentioned any medical procedures, so I hired a private investigator to find out what was going on." "You hired an investigator?" "That's how I discovered this address, how I found out Klaus was also Marcus and that Marcus was married to someone named Janet Irwin." She wiped her eyes. "I came here this morning to confront him, to demand answers, but when I saw you, when I saw how devastated you were, you pretended to be my friend," I said, anger rising in my voice. "You let me cry on your shoulder while you knew the truth." "I didn't know what to do," Giselle said desperately. "You were falling apart, and I realized you were as much a victim as I was. Maybe more, because you'd been with him longer. I thought maybe I could help you get through it." "Help me?" I laughed bitterly. "You've been lying to me all day, just like he did." "I know how this looks, but Janet, please understand. I didn't know about you until yesterday. For 8 years, I thought I was Klaus's only wife. I thought our marriage was real." "Our marriage was real," I said firmly. "I don't know what you had with him, but Marcus and I were legally married 15 years ago." Giselle reached into her purse and pulled out a marriage certificate. "Klaus and I were legally married 8 years ago, in Nevada, under his stolen identity, but the marriage is still valid in the eyes of the law." I stared at the document, my world crumbling all over again. Marcus hadn't just been stealing identities and defrauding lenders. He'd been living a complete double life. 2 wives, 2 homes, 2 entirely separate existences. "How?" I whispered. "How did he manage to keep us both from knowing?" "The travel," Giselle said. "He told me he had to go out of town for business 3 or 4 days a week. I assume he told you something similar?" I nodded numbly. Marcus's frequent business trips, his explanations about client meetings in other cities, conferences, training seminars, all lies to cover up the fact that he was living with another woman. The phone calls, I continued, remembering all the times Marcus had stepped outside to take work calls. He was talking to you. And the late nights at the office. The weekend emergencies, he was with you. We stood there in my kitchen, two women who'd been unknowingly sharing the same man for 8 years. Two women who'd been living lies without knowing it. Did he tell you about Klaus being his twin brother? I asked. No, Giselle said. He told me Marcus was his business partner, that they worked together but traveled separately. When I asked why I never met Marcus, Klaus said he was very private, didn't like social situations. Different lies for different lives. Marcus had been incredibly careful to keep his two worlds separate, creating elaborate explanations for his absences, his divided attention, his need for privacy. The gender transition, I said. Did Klaus ever? No medical procedures that I knew of, Giselle said. But now I understand why he was sometimes different, moody, distant. He was recovering from surgeries I didn't know about, dealing with medical issues he couldn't explain. And the money. Did you ever wonder where Klaus got the money for your lifestyle? He said he was very successful in international business, import-export. It explained the travel, the irregular income, the cash payments. Giselle shook her head. I never questioned it because I loved him. I trusted him completely. Just like I had trusted Marcus completely. What happens now? I asked. The police arrested Marcus, but what about Klaus? What about your marriage? I don't know, Giselle said. Legally, I'm not sure which marriage takes precedence. Yours came first, but mine might be considered valid because it was performed under a legal identity, even if that identity was stolen. So we're both married to the same man, and we don't know which marriage counts? And we're both potentially liable for his debts, his crimes, the money he borrowed using our information as collateral. The full scope of Marcus's betrayal was becoming clear. He hadn't just stolen identities and defrauded lenders. He'd created an entire system of lies that had trapped two innocent women in his criminal web. There's something else, Giselle said quietly. The private investigator I hired found evidence that Klaus had been researching other women, bank employees, loan officers, people who worked in finance. I found the same list in his office, I said. We weren't his first victims. And we might not be his last. The investigator thinks Klaus was planning to establish a third identity, pursue another woman in another city. 3 wives, 3 separate lives. 3 women who would have been unknowingly supporting his criminal operation while believing they were in loving, committed relationships. Could you have seen this coming? I asked, looking at Giselle. Could anyone have suspected their husband was living a completely separate life? I don't think so, she said sadly. He was incredibly careful, incredibly convincing, and we loved him. Love makes you trust people, makes you give them the benefit of the doubt, even when that trust destroys your life. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women processing the magnitude of the deception we'd been living under. Marcus hadn't just hidden his gender transition. He hadn't just committed financial fraud. He'd built an entire criminal empire based on exploiting the love and trust of innocent women. What do we do now? I asked. I think we need to work together, Giselle said. Pool our information, help each other navigate the legal mess he's left us in. We're both victims here, Janet. We both deserve justice. And we both deserve the truth, the whole truth. Even if it hurts worse than what we already know? I thought about that question. In the space of one day, I'd discovered my husband was transgender, had committed insurance fraud, was a career criminal who'd stolen multiple identities, and had been married to another woman for 8 years. How much worse could the truth possibly get? Yes, I said firmly. Whatever else he's been hiding, I need to know. We both need to know. Giselle nodded. Then we keep digging, together. I finally understood part of it. My husband wasn't just a criminal who'd stolen identities to fund his medical transition. He was a bigamist who'd been living an elaborate double life, deceiving 2 wives while running a sophisticated fraud operation. But even as I processed this shocking revelation, something still nagged at me. The list of other women Marcus had researched. The evidence that he'd been planning a 3rd identity, a 3rd marriage. If he'd been this careful, this methodical, this successful at maintaining 2 separate lives for 8 years, what else had he been planning? And were Giselle and I really the only victims, or just the only ones who'd discovered the truth? Something told me we'd only scratched the surface of Marcus's deception, and that the worst revelations were still to come. The next morning, Giselle and I met at a coffee shop downtown. We'd agreed to share everything we'd found to piece together the full scope of Marcus's deception. But neither of us was prepared for what we'd discover. I brought copies of everything, Giselle said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Bank statements, travel receipts, medical bills, 8 years of Klaus's life. I opened my own folder. 15 years of Marcus's records, at least the ones I could find. We spread the documents across the table like puzzle pieces, bank statements from different institutions, medical bills from clinics across 3 states, travel receipts showing trips to cities I'd never heard Marcus mention. Look at this, I said, pointing to a receipt from Chicago. Marcus told me he was visiting his sick aunt in Phoenix that weekend. That same weekend, Klaus told me he was in Miami for business, Giselle said, checking her own records. But according to this credit card statement, he was in Chicago too. So he wasn't with either of us. He was somewhere else entirely. We continued comparing documents, finding more discrepancies. Weekends when both Marcus and Klaus had claimed to be traveling, but the receipts showed they were in completely different cities than either of us had been told. Janet, Giselle said slowly, what if there's more than just us? The thought had been nagging at me too. You mean other women? Think about it. If he could maintain 2 separate lives for 8 years, if he could be this organized, this careful. I stared at the travel receipts spread across the table. Chicago, Denver, Atlanta, San Diego. Cities where Marcus had claimed business trips, where Klaus had claimed client meetings. But what if neither story was true? What if he wasn't just traveling for business? I said. What if he was visiting other wives? The possibility hit us both at the same time. Marcus hadn't just been living a double life. He might have been living multiple lives. The private investigator, I said urgently. Did he find anything else about those other women Klaus was researching? Giselle pulled out another file. He did background checks on 12 women across 6 states. All of them worked in finance or had access to significant assets. All of them were single, looking for relationships. Dating websites? Multiple platforms. Klaus had profiles on at least 8 different sites, using different photos, different backgrounds. The investigator thinks he was actively pursuing relationships with several women simultaneously. My hands shook as I processed this information. So while he was married to both of us, he was potentially courting other women? Or already married to them? The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too crowded. I needed air, needed space to think. But Giselle wasn't finished. There's something else, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The investigator found property records. Klaus owns real estate in 4 different states. Houses, apartments, even a small farm in Oregon. Property he never mentioned to you? Never. And according to the records, some of these properties have been in his name for over a decade. Since before we met. I thought about our modest suburban home, the mortgage we'd been paying together for years. Marcus had always claimed we couldn't afford anything larger, anything nicer. He'd said his business was doing well, but not well enough for luxury. What kind of properties? I asked. Nice ones. A condo in Denver worth several $100,000. A house in Atlanta with a swimming pool. The farm in Oregon sits on 40 acres. Several $100,000. Multiple properties. While I'd been clipping coupons and working overtime to help pay our mortgage. Giselle, I said carefully, what if the properties aren't empty? She met my eyes. What if other women are living in them? Women who think they're married to their devoted husbands. Women who have no idea their husbands have other lives, other wives. Women just like us. The magnitude of Marcus's potential deception was staggering. Not just 2 wives, but possibly 4 or 5 or more. Not just identity theft and insurance fraud, but a systematic operation spanning multiple states and potentially dozens of victims. We need to find them, I said. The other women? All of them. If they exist, they deserve to know the truth. Giselle nodded grimly. The investigator can help. He already has addresses for the properties, background information on the women Klaus was targeting. And we need to contact the authorities. The police who arrested Marcus might not realize how extensive this operation really is. A federal crime, wire fraud across state lines, bigamy in multiple jurisdictions. I thought about the 3 doctors who'd come to our door demanding payment. 15 years of surgeries, they'd said. But what if it wasn't just gender reassignment procedures? What if Marcus had been using his multiple identities to receive medical care he couldn't afford, leaving unpaid bills in cities across the country? The medical debt, I said. What if it's not just from his transition? You think he was getting treatment under different names? Think about it. If you're maintaining multiple identities, multiple lives, you'd need medical care you couldn't trace back to your real name. Especially if you were planning to disappear. Start over somewhere else. So he uses stolen identities to receive expensive medical treatment, then abandons the debts when he moves on to a new identity, leaving the real identity holders responsible for bills they never incurred. We sat in silence, both of us processing the scope of what we were uncovering. Marcus hadn't just betrayed us personally. He'd potentially destroyed the lives of dozens of people whose identities he'd stolen, whose trust he'd exploited. How long do you think he's been doing this? Giselle asked. I thought about the timeline. Marcus had claimed his gender transition happened gradually over several years. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if the medical procedures were part of a larger pattern of identity manipulation? What if the transition wasn't just about gender? I said slowly. What if it was about becoming someone completely different? Someone unrecognizable? You mean he's been planning this for years? Decades even. The perfect crime. Change your appearance so dramatically that even people who knew you before wouldn't recognize you. Then use that new identity to start over, commit new crimes, disappear again. And the wives are just, what, sources of income? Cover stories? And alibis. If you're married to a respectable woman with a steady job, who's going to suspect you're a career criminal? The coffee in my cup had gone cold, but I couldn't taste anything anyway. Everything I'd believed about my marriage, about Marcus, about my own judgment, was crumbling. "There's something else we need to consider," Giselle said quietly. "What?" "If he's this sophisticated, this careful, this successful at maintaining multiple identities, yes? What makes us think Marcus and Klaus are his only identities? What if there are more?" The thought sent chills down my spine. How many names had he used? How many women had he deceived? How many crimes had he committed while I was making him dinner and helping him with his taxes? "We need to call that investigator," I said. "Today. Right now." "And we need to prepare ourselves," Giselle said. "If we're right about this, if Marcus really has been running a multi-state criminal operation for years, then we're not just victims of bigamy and fraud. We're witnesses to something much bigger, something that could put us in danger." I hadn't considered that possibility. If Marcus had been this successful at deception for this long, if he had this much to lose, what would he do to protect himself? What would he do to silence the two women who could expose everything? "Do you think he knows we've met?" I asked. "I don't know. But if he's as smart as we think he is, he's probably figured out that his arrest would eventually lead us to each other. Which means he's probably planning his next move. From jail?" "Giselle, if he's been running multiple identities for years, do we really think the police arrested the right person? What if Marcus was just one of his identities? What if the real mastermind is still out there?" The possibility terrified both of us. We'd been assuming that Marcus's arrest meant the end of his criminal operation. But what if it was just the beginning? What if exposing one identity had only forced him to activate others? "We need protection," Giselle said, "and we need to find those other women before he does." "You think he'd hurt them?" "I think a man who's been living this kind of lie for years will do whatever it takes to keep it from unraveling completely." I gathered the documents from the table, my hands shaking slightly. 24 hours ago, I'd thought my biggest problem was my husband's gender transition and some unpaid medical bills. Now I was potentially dealing with a career criminal who might have multiple wives across multiple states and who might be planning to eliminate anyone who could expose his operation. "Could you have seen this coming?" I asked Giselle. Could anyone have imagined their husband was capable of something like this? She shook her head. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the times I should have asked more questions. But how could we have known? He was so careful, so convincing. And we loved him. We trusted him." "We're going to need help," I said. "Professional help. The kind of help that can track down multiple properties across multiple states and find women who might not even know they're in danger." "The FBI? If this is as big as we think it is, local police won't be enough." We left the coffee shop with a plan. Contact the private investigator immediately, compile everything we'd discovered, reach out to federal authorities who specialized in multi-state fraud operations. But as we walked to our cars, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere, somehow, Marcus knew exactly what we were doing, and that our investigation had just put us in serious danger. I finally understood part of it. My husband hadn't just been living a double life with two wives. He'd potentially been running a sophisticated criminal operation spanning multiple states, multiple identities, and multiple victims. But even as the scope of his deception became clear, one question haunted me. If Marcus was this careful, this methodical, this successful at staying hidden for so long, what had made him careless enough to get caught now? And why did I have the terrible feeling that his arrest wasn't the end of this nightmare, but just the beginning? The private investigator's office felt like something out of a detective movie. Dark wood paneling, filing cabinets that had seen better decades, and the smell of old coffee and cigarettes. Detective Ray Morrison had agreed to meet with Giselle and me on short notice, and the expression on his weathered face told me he'd seen cases like this before. "Ladies, I've been doing this for 23 years, he said, spreading our documents across his desk. But I have to tell you, what you've uncovered here is more sophisticated than most criminal operations I've investigated." I watched him examine the travel receipts, the bank records, the medical documentation. Everything we'd pieced together over the past week painted a picture of deception so elaborate it made my head spin. "The question is," Morrison continued, "how deep does this go? You've identified at least 3 different identities your husband used. Marcus, Klaus, and now potentially a third name we found on some of these credit applications." 3? Giselle leaned forward. "We only knew about 2. David Chen opened a business account in Portland 2 years ago using Social Security information that traces back to a man who died in 1987. Your husband's been busy." My stomach dropped. 3 identities, 3 complete fabricated lives. How many women had fallen for his lies? How many families had he destroyed? "But here's what concerns me most," Morrison said, pulling out a folder I hadn't seen before. "I ran some background checks based on the information you provided, and I found something that changes everything." He slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Marcus, but younger. Maybe 15 years younger, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. They were both smiling, both wearing wedding rings. This photo was taken in Phoenix, Arizona in 2009. That's your husband. And that's Rebecca Martinez, who filed a missing person report on her husband David Chen in 2011. The room went silent. I stared at the photograph, trying to process what Morrison was telling us. "You're saying he abandoned a wife in Arizona?" Giselle asked. "I'm saying he's done this before. Multiple times. The pattern is always the same. He establishes an identity, marries a woman with good credit and steady income, uses her resources to fund his operations, then disappears when things get too complicated." "Operations?" I managed to ask. Morrison pulled out another file. "Your husband, under various names, has been running investment scams, identity theft rings, and insurance fraud operations across at least 6 states. The FBI has been tracking some of these activities for years, but they never connected them to the same person because he kept changing his identity." I felt like I was drowning. Every revelation made the betrayal deeper, more calculated. This wasn't just about bigamy or financial fraud. This was about a career criminal who had turned marriage into a weapon. "How many wives?" Giselle asked quietly. "That we know of." 5, including you 2. 5 wives, 5 women who had trusted him, loved him, built lives with him. 5 women who had been nothing more than tools in his criminal enterprise. "Where are the others?" I asked. "Rebecca Martinez moved back to Mexico after he disappeared. Sarah Kim remarried and lives in Seattle now. And then there's Linda Thompson." Something in Morrison's voice made me look up sharply. "Linda Thompson was wife number 1, married him in 1998 under the name Michael Torres. When he left her in 2003, she tried to track him down. She hired investigators, filed police reports, even tried to expose him online." "What happened to her?" Morrison's expression darkened. "She died in a car accident in 2015. Single vehicle crash on a mountain road in Colorado. No witnesses." The implication hung in the air like poison. Giselle reached over and grabbed my hand. "You think he killed her?" she whispered. "I think Linda Thompson got too close to exposing his operation. And I think your husband is more dangerous than either of you realized." My entire body went cold. The man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years? The man I'd cooked dinner for and helped with his fake medical bills? The man I'd trusted with my heart and my future might be a murderer. "We need to contact the FBI immediately," Morrison said. "And you both need to be very, very careful. If he suspects you're getting this close to the truth, he's in jail," Giselle said. "Under one name. But if he's as sophisticated as I think he is, he probably has contingency plans. Other identities that haven't been discovered yet. Resources we don't know about." Morrison gathered the files and locked them in his desk drawer. "I'm going to make some calls tonight. Federal agents who specialize in this kind of long-term fraud operation. But until then, you both need to watch your backs." We left his office in stunned silence. The parking lot felt too dark, too quiet. Every shadow could be hiding someone sent to silence us. Every car that passed could be driven by one of Marcus's criminal associates. "5 wives," Giselle said as we reached our cars. 5 women whose lives he destroyed. And one who died trying to expose him? "Janet, what if we're making a mistake? What if investigating this puts us in the same danger Linda was in?" I looked at my friend. This woman I'd never known existed a week ago. This woman who'd become my closest ally in uncovering the truth. She was scared. I was scared too. But I thought about Rebecca Martinez, about Sarah Kim, about Linda Thompson, about all the women who had suffered because of Marcus's lies. "Then we better make sure we expose him before he can hurt anyone else." The next morning, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. I was going to visit Marcus in jail, face to face, with everything I'd learned. I needed to look into his eyes and see the man who had deceived me so completely. The county jail was a gray concrete building that smelled like disinfectant and despair. I'd never been inside a jail before, never imagined I'd be visiting my own husband behind bars. The guards made me empty my purse, walk through metal detectors, sign forms I barely read. And then I was sitting in a small room with a scratched plastic table, waiting for the man I'd thought I knew to walk through that door. When Marcus appeared, he looked different. Smaller somehow. The orange jumpsuit made his skin look sallow, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But when he saw me, his face lit up with that same smile that had made me fall in love with him 3 years ago. "Janet, thank God you came. I've been trying to call you." I stared at him across that table, remembering Morrison's words. 5 wives, career criminal, possible murderer. And yet, sitting there in his jail uniform, he still looked like the man who had held me when I cried about my mother's death. The man who had convinced me to trust him with my heart. "I know everything," I said quietly. His smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "Giselle Irwin, Rebecca Martinez, Sarah Kim, Linda Thompson, David Chen, Klaus Weber, Michael Torres." With each name I spoke, I watched his face change. The mask was slipping. The charming, loving husband was disappearing, replaced by something colder, something calculating. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I know about the investment scams, the identity theft, the insurance fraud. I know about the fake medical bills and the forged documents. I know you've been running criminal operations for over 20 years. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with eyes I'd never seen before. Eyes that were assessing, measuring, looking for weakness. "And I know about Linda Thompson's car accident." That's when his mask came off completely. The man sitting across from me wasn't my husband anymore. He was a stranger, a predator who had been wearing my husband's face for 3 years. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Janet." "Then tell me." He laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I remembered. It was cold, bitter, dangerous. You think you figured it all out? You and that pathetic woman, Giselle? You think you understand what I've built? I understand that you're a criminal who destroys women's lives. I'm a survivor. I do what I have to do to stay ahead of people who would destroy me if they could. People like Linda, who couldn't leave well enough alone. The admission hung between us like a confession. He hadn't denied killing her. If anything, he'd just confirmed it. The FBI knows everything now, I said. The FBI knows what I've allowed them to discover. You have no idea how many contingencies I have in place, how many resources, how many people who owe me favors. You're in jail, Marcus. It's over. This? He gestured around the visiting room. This is temporary, a minor setback. I've been planning for something like this for years. What are you saying? I'm saying that exposing me was the biggest mistake you and Giselle ever made. And I'm saying that Linda Thompson learned that lesson too late. The threat was unmistakable. I stood up from the table, my legs shaking. You can't hurt us from in here. Can't I? The way he said it made my blood freeze. Morrison had been right. Marcus had resources we didn't know about, contingency plans, other identities that hadn't been discovered. Janet, he called as I headed for the door. Give Giselle my regards. Tell her I said hello. I walked out of that jail knowing I'd just spoken to a man who had threatened to kill me and my friend. A man who had possibly already killed once to protect his secrets. A man who, despite being behind bars, still believed he held all the power. But as I drove home through the afternoon traffic, I realized something had changed during that conversation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just scared. I was angry. Marcus had spent years manipulating women, using our love against us, turning our trust into a weapon. He'd destroyed 5 marriages, stolen identities, committed fraud across multiple states, and possibly committed murder. And he thought he could intimidate me into silence with threats. He was wrong. I called Morrison from my car. Then I called the FBI field office. Then I called Giselle. He threatened us, I told her. He as much as admitted to killing Linda Thompson, and he thinks he can still control this situation from jail. What do? We make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Ever. That evening, I sat in my living room surrounded by federal agents, private investigators, and prosecutors. They recorded my statement about the jail visit. They reviewed all the evidence Morrison had compiled. They explained how cases like this worked, how long investigations took, how complex prosecutions could be. But the lead FBI agent, a woman named Detective Sarah Chin, pulled me aside as the meeting was ending. Mrs. Page, I need you to understand something. Your husband's operation is more sophisticated than most organized crime rings we investigate. If he really has been planning contingencies for situations like this, if he really has resources and people working for him that we haven't discovered yet, then you and Mrs. Irwin could be in real danger. What kind of danger? The kind that got Linda Thompson killed. She handed me a card with a phone number on it. 24-hour protection detail. Use it if anything feels wrong. Anything at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus's words, about the cold look in his eyes, about Linda Thompson's car going off a mountain road. I kept wondering how many other secrets he was hiding, how many other crimes he'd committed, how many other lives he'd destroyed. But mostly, I kept thinking about the 5 women who had trusted him, who had loved him, who had believed his lies and paid the price for his ambition. The next morning, I got a call that changed everything. Mrs. Page? This is Detective Chen. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Marcus Torres, also known as Klaus Weber, also known as David Chen, also known as your husband Marcus Page, was released on bail 2 hours ago. My blood turned to ice. That's impossible. His bail was set at $500,000. Someone posted it. We're trying to trace the source, but it looks like it came from an account we've never seen before. Another identity we didn't know about. Where is he now? That's the problem, Mrs. Page. We don't know. I hung up the phone and immediately called Giselle. No answer. I tried again. Still no answer. 20 minutes later, I was standing in her driveway, pounding on her front door. No one answered, but her car was in the garage. I walked around to the back of the house and found the sliding glass door standing wide open. Giselle! I called out. No response. I stepped inside and immediately saw signs of a struggle. Overturned chair. Papers scattered across the floor, and on the kitchen table, a note written in Marcus's handwriting. Janet, we need to talk. Come to the old warehouse on Industrial Road. Come alone, or Giselle pays the price. You have 1 hour. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. Marcus was out of jail. He had Giselle. And he wanted to meet face to face to settle this once and for all. I grabbed my phone to call Detective Chen, then stopped. The note said, "Come alone. If I brought the FBI, would he hurt Giselle? If I didn't bring them, would he hurt both of us?" As I stood in Giselle's destroyed kitchen, holding that threatening note, I realized that everything Morrison and Detective Chen had warned us about was coming true. Marcus hadn't just been planning contingencies from jail. He'd been planning his revenge. And now I had less than an hour to decide whether to walk into what was obviously a trap or risk losing the only other person who truly understood what Marcus had done to us. The clock on Giselle's microwave showed 2:17 p.m. By 3:17, one way or another, this nightmare would finally be over. But as I headed for my car, I couldn't shake the terrible feeling that Marcus had been planning this confrontation for much longer than just the few days he'd been in jail. And that whatever happened at that warehouse, he still believed he held all the cards. I drove to the Industrial Road warehouse with Detective Chen's card clutched in one hand and my phone in the other. Every instinct told me to call for backup, but Marcus's note kept echoing in my mind. Come alone, or Giselle pays the price. The warehouse district was deserted at 3 p.m. Abandoned buildings stretched along both sides of the cracked asphalt road, their broken windows staring down like dead eyes. I pulled up to the address from the note and sat in my car for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The building looked like it had been empty for years. Rust stained the metal siding, and weeds grew through cracks in the loading dock. But Marcus's car was there, parked behind the building where it couldn't be seen from the road. I walked to the front entrance and found it unlocked. The heavy door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the cavernous space inside. Marcus? I called out. Back here, Janet. His voice came from somewhere deep in the building. I walked past empty offices and abandoned equipment, following the sound. My footsteps seemed impossibly loud on the concrete floor. I found them in what used to be the main production area. Giselle was sitting in a metal chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back, but she appeared unharmed. Marcus stood about 10 feet away, leaning casually against a support beam like we were having a friendly conversation. You came? He said. I wasn't sure you would. Let her go, Marcus. This is between us. He smiled that same charming smile I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. Actually, Janet, this involves all 3 of us, because Giselle and I have been having a very interesting conversation while we waited for you. I looked at Giselle, trying to read her expression. She looked scared, but there was something else there. something that made my stomach clench. "Tell her, Giselle," Marcus said softly. "Janet, I'm sorry," Giselle whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." "What are you talking about?" Marcus pushed himself away from the beam and walked closer. "Giselle hasn't been entirely honest with you, Janet, about how she found out about our marriage, about how she knew to hire Morrison, about a lot of things." The warehouse seemed to spin around me. "What do you mean?" "I've been working with her for months," Marcus continued. "Long before you found those travel receipts. Long before any of this came out. You see, Giselle never discovered she was married to Marcus Page by accident. She's known all along." I stared at Giselle, waiting for her to deny it, to explain, to make this make sense. But she just looked at the floor. "That's impossible," I said. She was as shocked as I was. She had no idea about the other wives. "Oh, she knew about some of them," Marcus said. "She just didn't know about you." The truth hit me like a physical blow. "You two planned this together." "Not exactly," Giselle said, finally looking up. "It started as something else entirely. Marcus contacted me 6 months ago. He told me he was married to multiple women, that he wanted out of all of it, that he needed help disappearing completely. He offered me money. A lot of money." "So you helped him?" "At first, yes. I helped him plan how to liquidate assets, how to cover his tracks, how to vanish without the other wives ever finding him. But then I started thinking about all those women he'd hurt, about all the lives he'd destroyed, and I realized I couldn't just help him disappear and leave everyone else to pick up the pieces." Marcus laughed. "So she came up with a better plan? Instead of helping me disappear, she decided to expose me. To all of you at once. Make me pay for what I'd done." "That's why you hired Morrison," I said, understanding flooding through me. "That's how you knew exactly what questions to ask? What evidence to look for? You already knew what we'd find." "I'm sorry, Janet. I wanted to tell you, but I knew you'd never trust me if you knew I'd been working with him originally. And I needed your help. I needed someone else who'd been hurt by him to make this work." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Everything I'd believed about the past few weeks, everything I'd thought I understood about Giselle, about our partnership, about finding the truth together, it had all been orchestrated. "So what now?" I asked Marcus. "Why bring us both here? Why this dramatic confrontation?" "Because Giselle made one crucial mistake in her plan," he said. "She underestimated me. She thought she could expose me, destroy my life, and walk away clean. She thought I wouldn't figure out what she was really up to." He pulled something from his pocket. A small digital recorder. "Every conversation we had while planning my disappearance is on here, Giselle. Every detail about how you helped me move money, hide assets, cover my tracks. Every crime you committed as my accomplice. If I go down, you go down with me." Giselle's face went pale. "You said you destroyed those recordings." I lied. Amazing how that works, isn't it? I looked back and forth between them, trying to process what I was hearing. "So this whole thing, everything we discovered, it was all just you two trying to outmaneuver each other?" "Not everything," Giselle said quickly. "The other wives, the fake identities, the fraud, all of that was real. I didn't make any of that up. I already knew about it when I approached you." "And Linda Thompson?" I asked. "The woman who died in that car accident?" Marcus's expression darkened. "That was an unfortunate accident." "Nothing more. The FBI doesn't think so." "The FBI can think whatever they want. They can't prove anything." I realized then that this confrontation wasn't really about me at all. It was about Marcus and Giselle, two people who'd been playing a deadly game of chess with each other for months, and I'd just been another piece on the board. But I also realized something else. Whatever Giselle's original motives had been, whatever lies she'd told me, the evidence we'd uncovered was real. The other wives were real. The crimes were real. The hurt and betrayal and destruction, all of it was real. "You're both criminals," I said finally. "You both used me. You both lied to me. But there's a difference between you." I looked at Marcus. "You destroyed lives for profit. You married women who loved you and stole from them. You committed fraud across multiple states. You may have committed murder." Then I looked at Giselle. "You helped him commit crimes, then tried to expose him when you realized how much damage he'd done. You lied to me about your motives, but you didn't lie about what he'd done." I pulled out my phone. "And you both forgot something important. I'm not just another victim anymore. I'm a witness to conspiracy, fraud, and kidnapping." I had Detective Chen's number ready to dial, but before I could press send, Marcus stepped forward. "Put the phone down, Janet." "No." I said, "Put it down." And I said, "No. This ends now, Marcus. All of it. The lies, the manipulation, the threats. It's over." I hit the call button. As the phone started ringing, I saw Marcus reach for something in his jacket pocket. That's when Giselle screamed, and that's when I realized that Marcus had been planning this confrontation for much longer than either of us had imagined. The warehouse, the isolation, the dramatic reveal of Giselle's betrayal. It had all been designed to get both of us in one place, with no witnesses, no backup, and no way out. Detective Chen's voice came through the phone just as I understood the true scope of Marcus's final plan. But by then, it might already have been too late. "Chen, get here now!" I shouted into the phone as Marcus's hand moved toward his jacket. "Warehouse on 5th and Industrial. Armed situation." Detective Chen's voice crackled through. "Janet, stay on the line. Units are—" Marcus pulled his hand back, empty. He'd been bluffing, but the fear in his eyes told me he knew it was over. "You called the police," he said, his voice flat. "Yes, because this ends today." Giselle was crying now, her hands shaking. "Janet, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted him to pay for what he'd done to all those women." "I know," I said, keeping my eyes on Marcus. "But you should have trusted me with the truth from the beginning. Would you have helped me if you'd known I was working with him originally?" I thought about that. Would I have? Probably not. But that wasn't the point anymore. "Maybe not," I admitted. "But at least I would have made that choice with all the facts." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Marcus looked toward the warehouse entrance, then back at us. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over for a long time. You just didn't want to admit it." The police burst through the warehouse doors with their weapons drawn. Detective Chen led the charge, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. "Hands up, all of you!" We complied immediately. Marcus tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Within minutes, he was on the ground in handcuffs. "Janet Page?" Detective Chen approached me carefully. "Are you hurt?" "No, but there's a lot you need to know." Over the next several hours, I told them everything. About the fake identities, the multiple marriages, the fraud, the conspiracy between Marcus and Giselle. I handed over every piece of evidence we'd collected, every document Morrison had found, every recording Giselle had made. Giselle was arrested too, but Detective Chen assured me that her cooperation would be taken into account. She'd been Marcus's accomplice initially, but her decision to expose him had ultimately brought justice for all his victims. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, interviews, and paperwork. The FBI took over the case when they confirmed that Marcus had been operating across state lines for over a decade. They found evidence of at least 12 different wives, though they suspected there were more who hadn't come forward. Linda Thompson's death was ruled a homicide after new evidence emerged linking Marcus to her car's brake failure. He would face murder charges in addition to everything else. But the most shocking discovery came when they searched Marcus's properties. Hidden accounts contained millions in stolen assets, money he'd taken from women who'd trusted him with their hearts and their futures. The legal system moved slowly, but it moved. Marcus was denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with a history of assuming false identities. Giselle was released on her own recognizance after agreeing to testify against him. I testified at the preliminary hearing, looking Marcus in the eye as I described how he'd manipulated me, stolen from me, and shattered my sense of reality. He looked smaller somehow, sitting at the defendant's table in his orange jumpsuit. The confident, charming man I'd married seemed like a completely different person. Maybe he was. The other wives came forward one by one as news of the case spread. Sarah from Phoenix, Maria from Denver, Catherine from Atlanta, each with their own story of betrayal, each with their own financial losses, each with their own broken dreams. We formed an unlikely support group, these women and I. Women who'd never met but who shared the unique trauma of loving the same sociopath. We helped each other navigate the legal process, the media attention, and the slow, difficult work of rebuilding our lives. Some of them were angry. Some were heartbroken. Some, like me, felt a strange sense of relief that the truth was finally out. I keep thinking I should have known, Sarah told me during one of our phone calls. There were so many red flags. We all think that, I replied. But he was good at what he did. He studied us. He knew exactly what we needed to hear. How do you trust anyone again after something like this? It was a question we all struggled with. How do you open your heart when someone has proven that love can be a weapon? The civil case moved faster than the criminal one. Marcus's assets were frozen, and the court appointed a trustee to oversee the recovery and distribution of stolen funds. It would take years to sort through everything, but the lawyers were optimistic that most of us would recover at least some of what we'd lost. Money wasn't everything, though. It couldn't restore the years we'd wasted, the dreams we'd built on lies, the fundamental trust that had been shattered. But it was something, and something was better than nothing. Giselle and I met for coffee 6 months after Marcus's arrest. She looked different, older, more tired, but somehow more honest, too. I know you probably hate me, she said, stirring sugar into her cup. I don't hate you, I said, and I was surprised to realize it was true. I'm angry that you lied to me. I'm hurt that you manipulated me, but I don't hate you. Why not? I thought about that. Because in the end, you chose to do the right thing. You could have taken his money and helped him disappear. Instead, you chose to expose him. That counts for something. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Yes, you should have. But I understand why you didn't. You were scared. You were in over your head. You made the best choices you could with the information you had. She started crying then. I never meant for it to get so complicated. When he first contacted me, I thought I could just take his money and walk away. But then I started thinking about all the women he'd hurt, and I couldn't live with myself if I helped him get away with it. What will you do now? Testify. Pay whatever price I have to pay. Try to make amends somehow. And after that? I don't know. Start over, I guess, if that's even possible. It is, I told her. It has to be. The criminal trial took place the following spring. Marcus pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, bigamy, and second-degree murder in exchange for a sentence that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. He would never hurt another woman the way he'd hurt us. I was in the courtroom when the judge read the sentence. Marcus didn't look at any of us. Not me, not the other wives who'd come to witness his downfall, not even his own lawyer. He stared straight ahead as the bailiff led him away in shackles. It should have felt like victory. In many ways, it did. Justice had been served. The monster who'd destroyed so many lives would never be free to do it again. But it also felt like the end of a very long, very dark chapter. And I was ready to start writing a new one. The civil settlement came through that summer. I received enough to pay off my debts and put a down payment on a small house in a quiet neighborhood across town. It wasn't the life I'd planned with Marcus, but it was mine. Completely honestly mine. I kept some of the other wives' phone numbers. We checked in on each other occasionally, sharing updates about the legal proceedings, about our healing process, about the small victories and setbacks that marked our journey back to wholeness. Maria started a support group for fraud victims. Catherine went back to school to become a counselor. Sarah moved back to her hometown to be closer to her family. As for me, I did something I'd never expected. I went back to work for Morrison Investigations. "You sure about this?" he asked when I called him about the job opening he'd mentioned. "After everything you've been through, you want to spend your time digging into other people's secrets?" "Maybe that's exactly why I want to do it," I said. "Maybe I can help other people find the truth before it's too late. The pay isn't great, the hours are long. And you'll see the worst of human nature on a regular basis." "I've already seen the worst of human nature. At least this way, I can do something about it." He hired me the next day. My first case was a woman who suspected her husband of cheating. It was straightforward. No fake identities, no criminal conspiracy, just a man who'd lost interest in his marriage and found comfort elsewhere. We gathered the evidence she needed for her divorce attorney, and she thanked me with tears in her eyes. "I kept thinking I was going crazy," she told me. "He made me feel like I was imagining things, like I was paranoid and jealous for no reason." "You weren't imagining anything," I assured her. "Trust your instincts. They're usually right." It felt good to help someone else find the truth. It felt good to use what I'd learned, what I'd survived, to make a difference in another person's life. The work wasn't always easy. Some cases brought back memories I'd rather forget. Some nights, I went home feeling like I'd been swimming in other people's pain all day. But it was honest work, real work, work that mattered. And slowly, gradually, I began to feel like myself again. Not the woman I'd been when I was married to Marcus. That woman had been built on lies and illusions. But a new version of myself. Stronger, wiser, more careful with my trust, but not closed off to the possibility of connection. I dated occasionally, though I took things very slowly. The men I met had to understand that I came with baggage, with walls that had been built for good reason. Most of them didn't have the patience for that kind of relationship. But that was okay. I was learning to be content with my own company, to find fulfillment in my work and my friendships, and the quiet satisfaction of a life built on truth instead of lies. One year after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was an apology, of sorts. A rambling, self-serving attempt to explain his actions and ask for forgiveness. He claimed he'd never meant to hurt anyone, that he'd gotten in over his head, that he'd been trying to find a way out when everything collapsed. I read it once, then fed it through my paper shredder. Some apologies come too late to matter. Some damage can't be undone with words. But forgiveness isn't really about the person who hurt you. It's about freeing yourself from the anger and resentment that can eat away at your soul if you let it. I forgave Marcus, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I also forgave Giselle, who sent me a card on the anniversary of the trial. She'd served 6 months in minimum security prison and was now working as a victim advocate for a nonprofit organization. She'd found her own way to make amends. Most importantly, I forgave myself for trusting too easily, for ignoring the red flags, for believing that love could conquer all, even when all the evidence pointed to deception. I learned that there's a difference between being naive and being hopeful. Naivety ignores reality. Hope acknowledges reality, but chooses to believe that better things are possible. I chose hope. 2 years after that terrible night in the warehouse, I stood in my backyard garden, watching tomatoes grow on vines I'd planted with my own hands. The house was small but cozy, filled with furniture I'd chosen myself and pictures of friends who knew the real me. My phone rang. Another case, probably. Another person who needed help finding the truth. I smiled as I answered. Morrison Investigations. This is Janet. How can I help you? The work continued. The healing continued. Life continued. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting your old life back. Sometimes it's discovering that you're strong enough to build a new one.